We just used some CSS properties that lets us span across multiple rows and columns and move the items around the grid. We used grid lines in the previous episode, but now we'll see how to do the same using named grid areas. Let's use the same contact form example. Back to the code. I have added IDs to each of the input blocks, name block, email block, and message block. And I've also retained the rules display grid and gap. Now I'm going to give a name to each of these elements using the grid area property like this. Name block, grid area, I'll be calling it name. You can give it any name here. It will not be specified within quotes, so you cannot have spaces, but you can have something like hyphens or underscores. I'll just keep it as name for now. Let's do the same for message block, grid area message, email block, grid area email, and then the button, it's right here, so let me specify grid area button itself. Now each of our elements have an area name. We can use these to position them within our grid. Let's start with the mobile layout. We use the property grid template areas. We've seen grid template columns, grid template rows. Now we will be using grid template areas. And here the value would be, let me first type it and then I'll explain, name. In the next line, email, the next line, message, and in the last line, button. Each line represents a row here, and we get 4 rows. Let's check this. Great, it's working. So the way it appears here is the way it appears in the browser. Now let's move to a larger screen size. Within the media queries, we still need to specify that we need 2 columns by using the grid template columns property. But now using the grid template areas, we will make the items occupy both the columns. So here the value would be name space message. Note that it's not name and message in separate quotes, it's in the same quote. Each row will just be a string. Name, message, email, message. So this is how it looks, right? Name is the first row, first column. Message is the second column, first row. Email is second row, first column. And message is second row, second column. And lastly, button space button. Take a moment to look at this. This is exactly how we want it to appear in the browser. Let's check. Great. With this, we don't need to calculate any grid lines or anything. This has more lines of code for sure, but it's easier to visualize. If we want different layouts for different screen sizes, then grid areas is a great way to do it. If you want better visualization, you can even add as many spaces as you want here this way. And these spaces do not really matter. You will still have the same structure. And let's say you need a blank cell. Say for example, we don't want the button to occupy both the columns but only the second column. Then we can specify a blank cell using a full stop or multiple dots like this. And now check. Yes, we have a blank cell here. Quick summary of what we did. We just gave an ID for each of the elements so that we can give it a grid area name. Every single element that occupies one or more cells in the grid needs to have an area name specified using the grid area CSS property. You can give it any name the way we did here, and this does not come within quotes. Once all the elements have some names, using the grid template areas, you can place those elements this way, where each row is a string in a new line. I want to show you another great use case for grid areas. Here's an example of a caption on an image. This caption has a transparent overlay on the image sticking to the bottom. Usually this is done with absolute positioning, but there's one problem there. When the image is too small, like on mobile screens, and let's say the caption is too long to fit in within the image, the text gets hidden. But this has been implemented using grid, which is why we see that the image expands to occupy the caption. Using absolute position, this is not possible. Now let me show you how to make items overlap like this using grid areas. Here's the markup. We have a figure element containing the image and the caption. Scroll up to the styles. Figure has some maxed width and max height, and the image is made to fit within the figure. Without grid, this is what we have. We have the image and below that we have the caption. Let's make figure a grid container by simply adding display grid. Now this automatically creates a single column but with two separate rows, so we still have the same thing. But what we want is a single row, that is, we need a single cell. Similar to the previous example, let's define grid areas first. Image, let me give it a name of something like fig. And then for the caption also, let's give a grid area and let's name it the same thing because we want both of them to occupy the same grid area. Now let's use grid template areas on the parent container to specify that we need a single cell and the grid area is fig. And there we go. We have the elements overlapping each other. By default, both items are stretching full height and full width. But we want the caption to align to the bottom of the cell and occupy only as much height as the caption height. And you remember which property you need to use to align content of one particular item vertically? Yeah, this might be a little confusing, but if you said align self, you got it right. Align self and the value is end. Great. Now we have the caption aligned at the bottom. Let's resize the window and check. For really small screens, the image expands to occupy the entire caption. Unlike absolute position, the text never gets hidden, the full caption is shown.